Hi guys, Eric's UK here, back again with another vid. Um, when was the golden age of role-playing games? I've been thinking about this a lot, really, for some reason, of late. Now, role-playing games popped up on the radar in the early 70s. I think it was either 73 or 74, if I'm not mistaken, that D&D sort of first arrived, hit the shelves, sort of thing. Even if it was just like a really basic sort of homemade sort of thing back then. So the 70s sort of built it up. The 80s, however, now this is where I think the golden age of RPGs was. In the 1980s, role-playing games really took off big time. Okay, you had the unpleasantness with like the Satanic Panic in America and parent organisations, which never made any sense to me. I mean, well, topic for another time maybe, but common sense, tells you that role-playing games don't do this sort of nonsense that they're on about. But the 80s saw gaming stores. All right, it took a little while for them to really sort of catch on over here in the UK. But America really, I think, sort of took off. And role-playing games, especially D&D, were extremely popular and prevalent in sort of like high schools and college and university, that sort of thing. But it wasn't just D&D. In the 80s, you had a whole plethora of role-playing games that you could choose from, depending on whatever genre you wanted. You had, it wasn't just D&D. You had other things like Tunnels and Trolls, RuneQuest, Rolemaster, Middle-earth role-playing, Call of Cthulhu, Paranoia game I didn't particularly like, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Chill, Robotech, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you name it, and I'm not going to keep throwing out names, but you pretty much had anything that you wanted, and games were on gaming store shelves. And I had a lot of stuff, I had a huge collection by the end of the 80s. The 90s is when I think it began to change. Early 90s, I don't know, it just didn't seem as big. There seemed to be a shift, I use the term, it didn't feel right anymore. I used to be able to pick, back in the 80s when I was at high school, equivalent over here in the UK, I used to pick up an issue of Dragon magazine, and you got a sense that role-playing games were big, shall we say, just for lack of a better term. That seemed to disappear. Sort of like the style of Dungeon and Dragon magazines changed. We had some gaming magazines here in the UK for a while, and they all sort of either lasted into the middle of the 90s or they died off by the end of the decade. But role-playing games seemed to take a hit as well. We had some greats like Deadlands, Vampire the Masquerade, and the Old World of Darkness stuff. But I don't know, and we played a lot of AD&D Second Edition. The 90s were big on that. And there's a lot of stuff, but it never seemed to ever capture the same feel that we had in the decade prior. Which I find really difficult to explain, I suppose. The 90s just seemed to lose something in it all. And towards the end of it, you started getting internet became a household thing, and you could interact a bit more with people online, which I ought to do that as a topic at some point, because I often think that was that was one of the, not death blows, but I certainly think that was one of the things that hurt role-playing games to me in a way. And that's going to sound really weird. Maybe I'll do that as a video at some point. But towards the end of the decade, I think we lost a lot of role players because of the beginnings of things like MMOs. I knew not many, but I knew a few people that played EverQuest. And I think once you got into the beginnings of the OOs and MMOs took off, I think you lost a lot of players because of ease. You didn't have to cart a load of books, dice, and what have you, minis, down to somebody's house or to their dorm room or local game store. If it was the next town over you had to go to, it was piddling down the rain. You could just log on and play with your friends on your chosen game. And if people couldn't make a game, well, it didn't matter. You kept playing, or you could just play the solo areas. I think 3rd edition D&D changed that a little bit. I think when that was released, we got a lot of interest back into the game for some reason. Maybe AD&D, despite being a good system, was showing its age. The D20 system was extremely popular. And I do think we got a lot of people back into the hobby at that point. I don't think it grabbed people in quite the same way as D&D did in the 80s, but the problem we had then was that there was a glut of products, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it also meant it was harder to find the good things. Whitewall Studios decided to kill off the original World of Darkness and release a brand new World of Darkness, which was nowhere near as good, unfortunately. We did sort of try it for a time, but there was no established setting, no canonical build like the old World of Darkness had. Just didn't work. And we wanted that old game, but obviously we wanted to use the new rules, and it just didn't work. The OOs, I think, saw a lot of indie games released as well. Not really an area I was ever particularly interested in. For me, indie games were like, I might be using the term wrong here, but for me, indie games were small, limited publishings, but were very different to the way that, say, D&D played. If you do like a search, you'll find things like My Life with Master or Dogs in the Vineyard, or hell, I'd even go so far as to say things like when Cubicle 7 had the Doctor Who license up until, I don't actually know whether they still do it or not, but a few years ago, I would class that as an indie game because it doesn't follow the standard sort of adventure setup or dungeon crawl sort of approach. Instead it was very much games where the players dictate what they want to do. The Doctor Who one I remember because the players had the option of basically deciding. You would do things in that game that you wouldn't do in, say, D&D or Pathfinder. You actually got benefits for letting yourself be captured, for example. And so the game was generally very free form and you kind of did it what you wanted. Anyway, I'm waffling. And for some reason, these seem to be quite popular in America, I think, but not so much over here. I think here in this country, in the UK, we wanted more of the same. I think the OOs gave us a lot more licensed properties than we had before. I mean, before there was like the old D6 Star Wars game, Middle-earth role-playing, obviously. But as the OOs went along, we had Babylon 5, we had how many versions of Star Trek? About 3 or 4. Firefly, And I think there was an attempt there to try and draw people in by using a beloved setting. And I think D&D, sorry, I somehow set the computer going there. I think, how can I put it? I think, I think the idea was to try and draw people in using established settings, but that sort of thing. But I think it didn't quite work because some things are very niche. I mean, there was a Starship Troopers one by Mongoose Publishing, I think, and we tried that and it was just awful. D&D had been doing phenomenally well under the D20 system, a system that worked very, very well. For some strange reason, Hasbro decided to basically kill that off. They wanted to do 4th edition, which, from my personal perspective, was an absolutely stupid move to make. 4th edition was an awful system. Awful. Thankfully, Paizo picked up the D20 system from them and created Pathfinder, the spiritual and, as far as I'm concerned, 1st edition of Pathfinder anyway, spiritual as well as physical heir to the D&D legacy. D&D 5th comes along, and quite frankly, I think that's terrible too. It's so D&D 5th and the new Pathfinder 2nd edition are throwbacks, I think. Games are becoming simpler. Maybe that's to draw new people in, or I don't know, because I don't think people are daft. I don't think people are stupid. A slightly more complex system like Pathfinder takes a little bit to learn, but I think that's preferable to the sort of thing you get with 5th edition or Pathfinder 2nd. But to get back on topic, I think the problem we've got, the golden age was most definitely the 1980s. Role-playing games were everywhere. They appeared in TV, they appeared in films. There's the D&D game going on in E.T., amongst other things. And I think it was everywhere. I think the 90s, for some reason, whether people who had been playing in the decade before were settling down with work, family, kids, whatever, I think we got a drop off, and it was hard to get new players. Because I think in this day and age, for some strange reason, you can grab people when they're young, teenagers, young adults, and they grab, they'll quite happily play sort of thing. Some people stick to it, some don't. But you try now, I'm 46 now. Ugh, horrible age. And I fear for the day when the people that I play with decide that they are going to give up. They're too old, or some bullshit like that. I mean, we've got some young players, but it's not going to be enough. I don't want to give up on my hobby, and I don't want my friends to give up on their hobby. But I can't help but wonder whether they're going to give up at some point as time goes by, and what's going to happen to the hobby when the old grognards, the old guard like myself, disappear. Is the hobby still going to go strong? Is it going to toddle about like I feel it's kind of doing at the moment? I think the golden age of role-playing games has come and gone. 30 years ago, it began to decline. And I'm not sure if we can rebuild that, or if we can, how are we going to do it? How are we going to get people to pick up pen, paper and dice? And are there going to be systems worth playing for it? Anyway, 15 minutes already nearly. Thank you for listening to this bit of a ramble. And I'd be interested to see your comments, what your thoughts are on it. I mean, I might, this is just my take on it. I'm just curious what everyone else thinks. The golden age of role-playing games for me is most definitely the 80s, and we've been on a slow decline ever since. Anyway, if you've got comments, put them in the little thingy down below, look, down there. Oh. And we'll see if we can start a discussion and get some video responses or something. Anyway, take care, guys. Happy gaming, and I'll see you when I see you. Eric CK out.